Hey Techno Studs, in this video we're going to talk about common troubleshooting tools, and I am a tool guy. I love tools, so I even got some of the tools here and I'm going to show you as we go through this video. So in this video, I'm just going to briefly mention about documentation because I really cover documentation in another video. I'm also going to briefly talk about LED status indicators, and I'm not going to go in depth into this video about that. And then I also will be talking about cabling tools, in which I'm going to briefly show some of the cabling tools that you'll use to assemble Ethernet cables. And then I'm going to show you a few other tools as well. And then we'll talk about line testing tools and what some line testing tools look like. Then we'll finish it off by talking about wiretaps. Like I say, a brief mention about documentation because it's really important. All that work that you go into making documentation before there's an issue is really going to help you troubleshoot and come down to answers quickly when you're troubleshooting and things are on fire and things are crazy. So I can't stress documentation enough. Make sure you have good documentation about your networks. The other thing I'm going to briefly mention about is LED status indicators. Most of your equipment comes with some sort of LED status indicator. So make sure that you're familiar with those, and you can find some switch right here on these particular switches. In the top left-hand corner, you can see some indicators on how the switch is performing. And then across the bottom, next to the ports, you can see how the ports are performing. And then there is even some LED lights on the back that tell you about power and some other things. So there are some LED statuses that will tell you what is happening on the different equipment. And even in your PCs, if you look on the back with the NIC card, there's a good chance that there's an LED indicating that it's active and it's functioning correctly. All right, and then as far as cabling tools, if you watched my videos up until now, you've seen my video where I talk about the Snips. This is not a pair of scissors. This is Snips. This is to cut cable and cut pairs of wire. And it even has here a little notch out here that I can strip some wire if I need to go and strip just the outer sheathing off of the wire itself. Or if I need to strip the sheathing around the cable, I have a special tool. This is a little razor blade that's in there. And then this is a little piece of metal that just keeps it tight against there. And then you roll this around the cable and the sheathing will come right off. And so you can set the depth to make sure that that doesn't go too far and dig into the conductors at all, because you don't want it to dig into the conductors. And then I also showed in a prior video this crimping tool that allows you to put an RJ45 end in here, put the cables into there, and then crimp that down. I also have one on here for RJ11, and then it's got a spot here where I can actually just cut the cable, and so I can put it in there and cut the cable. Although I rarely use that, I try to use the Snips. So those are some things I've already covered before. One thing I haven't covered yet is this punch down tool. So this is a punch down tool. The reason why it's called the punch down is because you take it and you push on it and it makes a little clicking sound. It's actually kind of a little hammer that just punches down on it, and it puts just the right amount of force on those cables. And what it's to do is, what it actually does is there's little conductors that the cable goes into, and it peels away the insulator around the conductor and then makes a connection there. And so this tool just pushes it down, and there's a little snip on it as well that shears that end off and pinches that end off, and so that way you don't have the extra ends to it. It makes it look sharp. And so you would use this like on the keystone jacks when you're creating the jacks, then you'd punch this down onto there. Or if you're working with 66 blocks, or if you're working with 110 blocks, this is what you'd use to punch that down. And you can even make some adjustments to it on how hard it actually punches that down. So Definitely use that. I have definitely used that in the past. It can be very helpful. Some things that you'll see maybe in your textbook or see out there that can definitely be helpful, but I don't know if I've really used this from a networking standpoint. And this is a wire cutter and stripper. Here, there's a wire cutter right here. The next little section on here will crimp certain connectors and certain ends. And then this section right here will actually strip the wire. Is for different gauges, and you can strip the insulation off the wire. So this is a tool that you could possibly see out there as well. I, once again, don't really see it. I probably have used it for like some of the shielding and getting the shielding grounded, but I haven't really used this for cabling. From cabling from a, if you're looking at like cable perspective, and you may need something like this. This is for your like RJ6. You put your RJ6 in here, put the end into here, and then this would crimp that together. So this is one for cable, like the cable that comes from the cable company, and then to put ends onto those. So those are some of the things that you would see with the cabling tools. Another thing for cabling as well is you may see some fish tape. So the fish tape is something that it's a stiff cable, and you take it out and you can fish this cable then through walls and through ceilings. And what you would do is you would then, this is 100 feet, so you'd take the route that you want the cable to go, and you'd fish it through all of that. Then you would tape, I've got some electrician's tape here, and I'd tape the cable to the end of that, and then I would pull that cable back through to get it through, maybe through ceilings or through walls, or to get it through tight places that you can't really actually get to and physically put the cable in there. You'd be able to do it with this. When you're splicing fiber, it's a little more tricky. So you need something like this Fusion Splicer here. You can see the two cables that are coming into it. And what it does is it precisely cuts the ends, because you need to have them exactly at that 90-degree angle. So it cuts the ends, polishes the ends, and then fuses those together. So that's a fusion splicer, and it's a little more complicated than doing like a RJ45 end. There's a lot of equipment when it comes to testing this cabling. Here's an example of this. I have talked about this before in one of my prior videos. I actually used this to test the RJ45 ends that we put onto it. You put the RJ45 into here. You put a connector on the other side, and then it will tell you if you've got continuity, and it'll tell you if you've got any of your wires crossed. So this is a very helpful tool, but I won't get too involved into that since I went to it in a prior video. Another thing that I've found to be very, very helpful, I think this thing is awesome. I don't really see it as much in networking equipment or in books and in some of the curriculum and stuff, but it's been something that I've used a lot and is really helpful. And that is, this is to find the cable lines. So you have jacks in your different rooms that you're going to plug in your computers and your phones and your different end devices into, and it then goes back to a network closet. But it can be sometimes hard if it's not properly labeled to know which is associated with that jack. So if you're trying to make that jack live and trying to figure out where that jack goes, what you can do is you can plug this RJ45 into the end of it, and then I can click this to generate a tone. And it's going to generate a tone on that line. And then what I'll do is on the other side within the network closet, I'll start going and testing out the different lines. And then when I hit the one that has the line that I'm generating the tone on, it's going to be very loud. And so I can positively identify that is the line without having to do a lot of troubleshooting and a lot of running back and forth. So that can be an awesome tool to help you out. So another thing that I really like as well is just something that tests the power. This is just a simple, it's a light, you plug it in, if the light turns on, then you're good to go. It actually does a couple other things and can tell you if your wires are crossed from your power perspective. So it'll do a couple other things, but this is a great cheap way to test your power to make sure that your power is working. Then you'll notice a lot of the content does talk about multimeters. Things like this is a digital multimeter and this is an analog multimeter. They serve really the same purpose. They just one reads out digitally and one reads out from an analog perspective. And what it can do is it can measure things like continuity, which continuity means, is it passing power through it, or is there some sort of open connection? So if it will register 0 if there's no connection at all, or it'll say yes, there is a connection and power is flowing through it. It also measures things like ohms and voltage and amps, so it can measure other things as well. This is listed out in a lot of the networking equipment books, but I really have not used this at all from a networking perspective. I use both of these a lot, but not from a networking perspective. So just realize that that is something that you may need to know for some of your tests, but you probably won't use it, or I at least have not used it out there in the field. There are spectrum analyzers that you can plug into your networks, whether it's a spectrum analyzer or portable network analyzer, ways to analyze the signal that's going across using that. This is going to be a little more expensive of equipment to use. I have not actually used a spectrum analyzer for networking, not at least from Ethernet perspective. I have used spectrum analyzers for wireless, and I've gotten onto wireless network to analyze wireless networks. So realize this could be something that you encounter. I don't see it as a common thing. One reason is because of the expense of the equipment, but you may see it out there. Then you have something like a loopback adapter. A loopback adapter just takes the wires and takes the transmits and turns it into a receive. Or in the case of fiber, it just takes the transmit from the fiber and reroutes it to the receive of the fiber of the same connection. So that's really the idea behind this loopback adapter. It's the same connection, and you just plug it in and it just tests that connection to see if that piece of equipment is even working correctly. Here's an example of it right here. This is a loopback adapter that comes with that tester for the cable ends. So you plug this on one end, you plug this on the other end, and then that tests that cable out. Or if I'm plugging into a jack, maybe I wired up a jack, then I've got a little adapter here that I can plug in there and measure that. So that's a loopback adapter, and it just takes the transmit and reroutes it to the receive. Once again, fiber does take special equipment, so that's where you have things like the OTDR, or the optical time domain reflectometer, and there's a fiber light meter, and those are just ways to make sure that the fiber cable is at a spec or at a required level for network traffic to go across it. So that is some other tools that you may use out there if you're working with fiber consistently. Then we have network taps. Network taps is like a phone tap where you are connecting into the connection and then you're listening to the traffic that goes across it. So let me give an example here. Maybe I want to listen into what this PC is saying. And so then what I would do is I'd reroute the traffic to this network tap, and what essentially it really is just a hub, right? So then I reroute to here and then route into my main switch, and then I would have a piece of equipment hanging off of it that is then analyzing that traffic, and I can see that traffic that's going across it. You can do the same thing with a lot of these smarter switches where you're going to say, well, this is coming in on FA0, maybe this is port 5 right here, and I'm going to mimic that traffic on FA0, let's say it's FA022, and then I have a machine out there that's capturing that data. And then I can go in there and analyze and see maybe I'm troubleshooting some sort of issue that's going on and I want to really see the traffic, or maybe I want to see what kind of security stuff's happening on my switches, so I can do that to be able to analyze that traffic. One other practical way that I've actually used this port mirroring here before is that I've worked for schools in the past that needed to be able to monitor their students and make sure they're not going to sites that they're not supposed to. And there's actually a few different ways that you can do that. But one of the ways that I did is all the traffic that was going out to the external sources would have a copy of it sent to what's called a WebSense server, which is a product that does web filtering. And what would happen is all the traffic that was going to the outside would also be directed to this WebSense. This WebSense would look it up and see where the students were trying to go. And then if it was somewhere where they shouldn't be going, before the traffic came back from that other web page, it would send a web page to the client and say, you're not supposed to be going to this site. We're going to log this and then let the administrators know that you're going to the site. So that's WebSense right there, and it was commonly implemented in K through 12 schools that were required to do some sort of filtering for their students. So that's network tap. Essentially, network tap is a way to listen into some of the traffic that's going across one of those ports. Before we wrap this thing up, I'm going to give an honorable mention to the screwdriver and the drill, because there are times when there's definitely unscrewing equipment from a rack where you need a screwdriver, or even a drill would be even more handy to make quick work of it. So there you go. So there we have some things that we talked about. Was the importance of documentation before there's an incident, because that's what's going to help you quickly resolve that incident. And then also we talked about the LED status indicators, a quick way to just see what's happening on equipment and if there is any faults on that equipment. We talked about some cabling tools. I ran through quickly some of the cabling tools that I talked about in a prior video, as well as some cabling tools that are possibly new and we have not talked about before. We talked about some line testing tools to how to test out those lines and make sure that they're operating correctly. And we wrapped it up with talking about wiretaps. Thanks again for watching my video. If you liked it, could you hit that like button?